In a crowded Roman forum, where voices clashed like swords and tempers often ignited faster than flames, there was once a man who stood apart. His name was Gaius, a merchant known not for his wealth, nor for the size of his caravans, but for the strange calmness he carried, like a shield no one could pierce. Competitors mocked him, thieves targeted him, and insults were hurled at him daily. Yet, no matter what was said or done, his expression barely moved, his tone remained steady, and his steps never quickened. One day, a young apprentice asked him in frustration, "Why do you not fight back? Why don't you shout at them the way they shout at you?" Gaius looked at the boy and smiled faintly. "Because when I react in anger, I hand them the strings to control me. And I am not a puppet." That very lesson would soon be tested. A wealthy senator, jealous of Gaius's growing influence, plotted against him. He spread lies that Gaius had cheated in his trade, and soon the whispers turned into shouts. Crowds gathered, calling him a fraud, demanding punishment. Soldiers dragged him into the court, where the senator's voice rose like thunder, accusing him of crimes he never committed. The crowd expected fury. They expected him to break down in protest, to cry out, to curse the senator. But Gaius stood silent, his gaze unwavering, as if the storm around him was nothing but wind brushing against a mountain. The magistrate demanded, "What do you say for yourself?" And with a calmness that chilled even his enemies, Gaius replied, "The truth does not tremble, even when shouted at. I will not waste my breath fighting with shadows." Whispers ran through the hall. Some mocked him for his restraint, others found themselves strangely moved. But the senator, unable to draw fire from him, grew restless. His anger became visible, his voice cracked, his face flushed with rage. The more he tried to provoke, the more he revealed his own lack of control. And slowly, the magistrate and the people began to see the truth, not in the words spoken, but in the composure of the man who refused to be shaken. The trial ended with no punishment, the lies crumbled, and the senator left humiliated, not because Gaius shouted louder, but because he did not shout at all. The apprentice, watching from the crowd, finally understood the strange power of not reacting, the strength of mastering one's own emotions while others drowned in theirs. It began one night when the silence of the city was broken by hurried footsteps outside Gaius's home. His apprentice rushed in, pale and breathless. "Master, they are coming for you. The senator has gathered men in the streets, mercenaries, not soldiers. He swore he would ruin you tonight." The boy's voice trembled, expecting panic, expecting his master to barricade the doors, to flee, or to prepare for violence. But Gaius, sitting by a small oil lamp, closed the scroll he had been reading and looked at the boy with steady eyes. "Then let them come. It is not danger that destroys a man, it is the fear of it." Moments later, torches lit the street, and fists pounded on the wooden door. The mercenaries shouted threats, demanding he come out. Neighbors hid behind their shutters, whispering that Gaius's end had come. But when the door creaked open, Gaius stepped out calmly, not with weapons in his hand, but with nothing but his presence. His robe was plain, his voice quiet, and yet the mob stilled. The leader of the mercenaries sneered. "You defy a senator, and now you'll pay for it. Do you not fear death?" Gaius met his gaze, unshaken. "Fear belongs to those who believe they have something that can be taken away. My peace cannot be stolen, even by you." For a moment, the men hesitated. They were used to screams, to resistance, to desperate pleading. But this stillness disarmed them more than any sword could. Some laughed nervously, others muttered that he was mad. Yet the leader pressed forward, shoving Gaius to the ground. The apprentice cried out, but Gaius raised a hand to silence him. Rising slowly, brushing the dust from his robe, he said, "Strike me if you must. You will wound only flesh. But I will not grant you the power to wound my soul." The words spread through the crowd like sparks in dry grass. Even those who came to harm him felt the weight of his composure. One by one, the mercenaries lowered their torches. The leader, furious at their hesitation, tried to incite them again, but the men refused. They could see clearly now. Violence against such a man would not bring victory, only shame. The mob dispersed, leaving the senator's plot broken once again. The apprentice, still shaken, asked, "How do you do this? How can you face such hatred without rage, without fear?" And Gaius answered softly, "Because storms cannot sink a ship that is anchored within. The world outside may roar, but the true battle is here," he tapped his chest, "and here I do not allow defeat." The boy never forgot that night. But Gaius's trials were not over, for his greatest test would not come from enemies outside, but from a tragedy that struck closer than he ever imagined. It began when the sickness swept through the city. At first it was whispers in the marketplace, rumors of fevers and sudden deaths in the poorer quarters. But soon, the reality could no longer be ignored. The disease spread quickly, cutting through families, leaving the streets lined with grief. One morning, as the apprentice returned from buying grain, he found Gaius seated by the bedside of his only son, Marcus. The boy's face was pale, his breath shallow. The same calmness Gaius had carried into courts and before mobs was there again, yet behind his eyes flickered a pain deeper than words. The apprentice fell to his knees. "Master, you must be broken. Say something, cry, curse the gods, anything. How can you just sit there?" Gaius placed a cool cloth on his son's forehead and spoke quietly. "Do you not see? Life was never ours to hold, only to cherish while given. To weep for what nature reclaims is to fight against the order of all things. What matters is not how long he stays, but how well I loved him while he was here." The apprentice's heart clenched at those words. For 3 nights, Gaius kept vigil by his son, never leaving his side, whispering lessons, stories, and gentle words, even as Marcus drifted further from this world. And when the final breath escaped the boy's lips, Gaius closed his eyes, kissed his forehead, and covered him with a cloth. There were no cries, no collapse, no rage at fate, only a heavy silence. But those who knew Gaius said his silence was not emptiness, it was strength. At the funeral, neighbors whispered that a man without tears was a man without love. Yet the apprentice, who had seen everything, understood the truth. His master's love was not in his tears, but in his unshaken presence, in his refusal to let grief strip away the dignity of memory. Days later, the apprentice asked, "How can you endure the loss of your own blood and not break?" Gaius answered, his voice steady though his eyes carried sorrow, "Because breaking would not honor him. My son's life was a gift, not a possession. To demand that it last forever would be selfishness disguised as grief. I choose instead to honor what was given, and let go of what was never mine to command." The apprentice realized then that true strength was not the absence of pain, but the mastery of it. Yet fate was not done testing Gaius. For not long after his loss, an event shook the entire city. A rebellion sparked in the very heart of Rome, and once again, Gaius would find himself standing where fear, chaos, and rage ruled the streets. It was in that uprising that his calmness would be pushed to its ultimate limit, when the rebellion broke out, Rome became unrecognizable. The forum that once buzzed with trade and debate now roared with chaos. Citizens clashing with guards, flames licking the night sky, and the sound of steel ringing through narrow streets. Homes were looted, temples defiled, and men who had been neighbors only days before turned against each other in fury. The apprentice and Gaius moved cautiously through the madness. Shouts echoed, soldiers dragged dissenters away, and the cries of the wounded filled the air. At one corner, they witnessed a mob beating a merchant accused of hoarding grain. The apprentice flinched, gripping Gaius's arm. "Master, we should leave this place. This is not our fight." But Gaius stood unmoved, his eyes fixed on the scene. Then, without hesitation, he walked forward. The mob's rage turned toward him. "Stay back, old man!" one of them barked, bloodied fists raised. Gaius's voice carried through the chaos, low yet commanding. "You are striking not a man, but your own humanity. Does this violence make your hunger less? Does cruelty fill your empty bowls?" For a moment, the mob wavered, stunned by his composure. Some spat at the ground, others growled, but one by one, their blows slowed until the merchant lay gasping yet alive. The crowd scattered, leaving Gaius kneeling to help the man rise. The apprentice whispered in awe, "How do you face a crowd like that without fear?" And Gaius replied, "Because fear is born from the thought of what they can take from me. But if I hold nothing, no anger, no hatred, no illusions of control, what power do they truly have?" The rebellion raged for weeks, and food grew scarce. Fires consumed entire districts. The apprentice often despaired, but Gaius never faltered. When others hoarded, he shared. When others panicked, he spoke calmly. And when violence came too close, he stood like a stone in the river, unshaken though the waters raged around him. Yet the true test came on the night the rebellion reached their own street. Armed men stormed door to door, seizing whatever they pleased. Neighbors screamed as their homes were torn apart. The apprentice turned to his master, panic rising. "We must run. If we stay, they will destroy us too." But Gaius shook his head slowly. "Running may save the body, but fleeing in fear will enslave the soul. Tonight we stand." The door shuddered under pounding fists, and the rebels forced their way inside. Torches lit the room, and the apprentice trembled as rough voices demanded everything they owned. Yet Gaius stepped forward, unarmed, his face calm. The leader snarled, "Old man, give us your stores or we burn this place to the ground." Gaius met his eyes, unflinching. "Take what you wish. But know this, if you burn what you cannot carry, you destroy nothing of mine, only the ashes of wood and stone. My peace is not kept in walls, nor in grain, nor in gold. And it is not yours to steal." The rebels, expecting screams and begging, found themselves confronted with something they could not understand, a man beyond their reach. Some cursed him, some laughed bitterly, but none could bring themselves to strike him. They took what little was left and departed, leaving the house standing, untouched by flame. The apprentice sat trembling in the silence that followed, staring at his master. "You could have been killed, and yet you didn't even raise your hand to stop them. Why?" Gaius answered, his voice like a steady flame in the dark, "Because a man cannot control the chaos around him, but he can command himself. And when he does, he is freer than any emperor, safer than any army, and richer than all the wealth in Rome." The rebellion eventually ended, but the memory of that night never left the apprentice. He realized that while armies subdued the city with swords, it was his master's self-control that had subdued the greater tyrant, the fear within. But years later, when peace returned and Gaius had grown older, a final test awaited him, one that would challenge not just his calmness in the face of others, but his very acceptance of life and death itself. It began when